We hope you're ready, folks, because today we're discussing the most dangerous SCP of all time. We know you've probably heard this before, but seriously, this one is the absolute top of the pyramid of fear, or the fear amid, if you will. This SCP makes 682 weep in terror for its life. It makes the old man, SCP-106, consider turning his life around and taking up a career in humanitarian work. It even makes the dreaded Scarlet King himself, the Lord of Chaos, the ultimate despair, quake in his spiky red boots. It's just that utterly terrifying. Just kidding, it's Lego. But we had you going there for a second, didn't we? Though it may not actually be the scariest anomaly of all time, SCP-387 isn't your granddad's Lego set either. Unless your granddad goes by Agent Hardy and works for the SCP Foundation. Hardy is one of the hundreds of thousands of Foundation field agents planted all over the globe, in everything from law enforcement to surveillance. Ever watchful for the kinds of anomalies the SCP Foundation makes it their mission to secure, contain, and protect. But when he discovered SCP-387, he wasn't even technically on duty. He was taking a long train journey home from his parents' house while his car was in the shop. And as anyone who's ever taken a long train journey knows, without proper stimulation, boredom will crop up in no time. He'd been reading a pretty interesting book on his e-reader when tragedy first struck and it ran out of battery. Hardy had forgotten to bring his charging cable, so he was potentially looking at another 3 hours of mind-numbing monotony. That's when he noticed the red plastic tub that had been apparently abandoned in the seat across from him. He realized in that moment that it had been there the whole time, unsupervised. Given that he was a Foundation field agent and was, as such, extremely curious, he grabbed the tub and took a look inside, hoping to find something that'll quell his growing boredom. Lucky for him, the box was full of Lego bricks, everyone's favorite brand of toy construction block. The tub was brimming with a vast collection of pieces, some of which, like wheels and prisms, Agent Hardy had never seen before, despite spending his childhood obsessively making Lego constructions. But Hardy wasn't one to criticize a gift from the universe. This tub of Lego pieces would be the perfect way to keep himself entertained for the rest of his long journey. He spent the next hour or so meticulously recreating Site-19 in Lego form on the table in front of him. When the building was done, he decided to have some fun and populate the site with a collection of Lego men, standing in for SCP Foundation scientists, containment specialists, and guards. After finding a torso with a lab coat in the box, Agent Hardy decided to make a tiny Dr. Bright to start with. However, as soon as he made the tiny Lego scientist and set it down on his new Site-19 playset, he realized that everything was not as innocently typical as it seemed. The little man instantly began to walk, immediately picking up a tiny Lego clipboard and heading towards the Euclid containment wing. Agent Hardy had discovered a brand new anomaly on his day off while playing with toys on a boring train ride. Philosopher L.P. Jacks was certainly right when he said, "A master in the art of living draws no sharp distinction between his work and his play." Naturally, Agent Hardy immediately took the little Lego man apart, along with his Site-19 simulacrum, and alerted his superiors at the SCP Foundation. His coworkers met him at the next train stop platform. Not long after, the box of seemingly living Lego pieces, redesignated SCP-387, was in the hands of Foundation researcher Dr. Arch. His first priority was finding out what exactly they were all dealing with here, whether there was more of it out there, and whether it was dangerous. Attempts to investigate the origins of SCP-387 were mostly fruitless. Undercover Foundation agents investigated every Lego-producing location they could find, but found no evidence of anything similar to 387 being produced. And of course, as with anything that seemed to be an anomalous toy, all possible links to Dr. Wondertainment were also explored. But again, nothing came up. This was probably for the best. If 387 was a Dr. Wondertainment product, it probably would have built itself into an actual-sized dinosaur and started eating people already. All further investigations into 387's origins were subsequently dropped, with background research turning out to be a dead end. Dr. Arch decided to get down to business doing the fun part, actual experimentation. After gathering all the proper permissions from his superiors, the testing commenced. In Experiment 387-A, Dr. Arch recruited a number of Lego-loving D-classes. After all, even convicted robbers, arsonists, and murderers love Lego, and made them construct a little Lego community inside a testing chamber. This consisted of a small main street with a number of Lego stores, a residential area, and a bar. As soon as the D-classes constructed a variety of little Lego men and released them into the community, they instantly came to life and began performing their roles perfectly. Some took up jobs in the various stores, cafes, and boutiques. Others acted as patrons for the different businesses. The Lego men were even noted as forming rudimentary family units. One man did fall into the river in this Lego city, but otherwise things were going smoothly. Encouraged by these developments, Dr. Arch was ready to begin the true experiment, introducing a complex new variable into the environment of the Lego men, and seeing exactly how they reacted. He had another D-class build a commercial airliner out of normal non-anomalous Lego bricks and place it just to the side of the Lego community. Over the following 3-hour period, Dr. Arch observed the Lego man engaging in some truly remarkable behavior. Upon noticing the plane, the Lego man began to form a plan. They first procured the necessary equipment from the SCP-387 tub and headed over to the plane for a hard day's work. In Lego man time, at least. With remarkable efficiency, the citizens of the Lego community began forming a fully functional airport around the plane. Multiple runways, an air traffic control tower, and even a mall and food court within the airport itself. Tiny Lego attendants tried to sell perfume to uninterested Lego commuters, and Lego TSA agents frisked uncomfortable would-be Lego passengers. Its accuracy to the real-life airport experience was truly brilliant. But they didn't stop there. A tiny Lego fuel truck sped over to the plane and acted out the process of refueling it. A Lego pilot and his Lego co-pilot climbed into the plane, and it took off, literally flying around the room without any kind of logical propulsion system. Dr. Arch was amazed. And even then, they didn't stop. They continued to build more planes of various makes and models, resulting in a sprawling airport that, if you squinted, would look just like the real thing. From this, Dr. Arch concluded that the 387 Lego men had the ability to convert non-anomalous Lego pieces into anomalous ones. He proceeded to the next experiment. For experiment 387-B, Dr. Arch decided to switch up the D-classes and instead brought in some of Lego's more traditional target audience, a group of 10-year-old children. They began building some basic constructions out of the pieces, your typical buildings, people, and cars. But when they realized that their creations were actually alive, their tune immediately changed. The kids spoke in hushed, excited tones about a new plan, and then began putting it into practice. They built functional transformers. And just to be clear, it wasn't electrical transformers they crafted. We're talking transformers as in actual Optimus Prime and Megatron, an M1 Abrams tank, and a number of different Lego weapons of mass destruction. Dr. Arch was mortified, realizing that he'd apparently gathered up a team of budding childhood supervillains and had them removed from the test chamber for amnestic treatment immediately. However, the second the test chamber was vacated, the kids' creations came to life and entered a state of all-out war. It was an intense battle, lasting about an hour and left no Lego survivors, just a huge mess around the room. While this test was largely an embarrassment for all involved, it did lead to some interesting new data. Not only was this anomaly safe in the sense that it didn't pose a containment breach, it was also safe in the more colloquial sense. There was no way these Lego bricks could hurt you, unless you decided to eat them and choked. Don't do that, by the way. We see you. Don't. SCP-387 is unable to perform dangerous actions if humans of any age are present in the vicinity, and this arrangement goes both ways too. The Lego creations will be alive and, to some extent, sentient if played with peacefully. However, if the human playing with them becomes hostile, then they will immediately become inanimate. So play nice, folks. Next came Experiment 387-C and Experiment 387-C2. Where Dr. Arch turned his attention to the tub itself. Since SCP-387 came into the Foundation's possession, the quantity of 387 blocks had increased. How is this possible, you're probably wondering? Dr. Arch and his team discovered an interesting phenomenon. When some of the SCP-387 is placed back in the red tub, but the red tub isn't filled, then 387 will self-duplicate to fill out the tub, much like the way a gas will disperse to fill out any containment unit it finds itself inside. However, Dr. Arch also discovered some interesting limitations. There seemed to be no inherent anomalous qualities to the red tub itself. During one of the experimentations, Dr. Arch half-filled the red tub with non-anomalous Lego pieces, and found that nothing changed. Similarly, he performed another experiment where he placed a single SCP-387 brick into the box. and found there was no difference when he came back. Dr. Arch and his associates came to the conclusion that the anomalous properties are confined solely to the bricks themselves, but they have a kind of symbiotic relationship with the red tub, as they don't replicate in any other containment units. In order to activate replication, the 387 must cover the entire bottom layer of the tub. Next came Experiment 387-D, where Dr. Arch hoped to test the specific activation mechanisms of SCP-387. The LEGO creations animated whenever they were assembled by a child or an adult, so it wasn't an age-regulated anomaly. The next experiment involved using a remotely controlled robotic arm to create a LEGO construction, to see if the mere act of construction itself was enough to instigate 387's primary anomalous effect. However, this didn't turn out to be the case. The robotic arm assembled LEGO construction never came alive. Dr. Arch's next hypothesis was that perhaps flesh was needed to activate SCP-387. But how could he test using flesh without just having a normal human assemble the LEGO pieces? Thankfully, the answer came to Dr. Arch by total accident. A few cells over, an anomaly trying to breach containment had just killed a Foundation agent trying to stand in its way. While the D-classes cleaned up the mess, Dr. Arch dragged the body over to where the 387 tests were being conducted, and meticulously puppeteered its arms and hands to put together more 387 LEGO constructions. But once again, it didn't come to life. Interesting. Next hypothesis. Maybe it needs warmth to activate? In a move that proved unpopular with coworkers just trying to eat their pre-packaged sandwiches in the Site-19 break room, Dr. Arch dragged the dead Foundation agent's body over towards the room's radiator and leaned its arms and hands over the top of it for 20 minutes, before giving his newly discovered puppeteering skills another go. But once again, nothing happened. Dr. Arch concluded that perhaps human psychic energy, or maybe an active pulse, was what caused 387 to activate. If you're waiting for the horrifying twist, well, aside from the puppeteering of a dead coworker's limbs, we're pleased to tell you that there just isn't one this time. SCP-387 serves no containment breach risk, and no risk of harm to Foundation personnel. In fact, playing with the living LEGO has led to an 87% increase in morale for Foundation staff. So as long as you fill in the proper forms and tidy up afterwards, you're actually allowed to play with the SCP-387 anytime you want. After all, working for the SCP Foundation is a stressful job, and really we're all children at heart. Oh, and there was one more experiment. Experiment 387-E, where a LEGO community was built using SCP-387, and then a pile of Mega Blocks, LEGO's most common imitator, was introduced into the mix. The LEGO men of the community really weren't pleased by this. While the actual details of what happened have thankfully been expunged, the one clue to what may have happened came from a note left by Dr. Arch. That's right, the puppeteer guy. His notes on that experiment were 4 simple words. Oh no, not again! Now go check out SCP-1007 Mr. Life and Mr. Death, and SCP-5094 Miss J's Whiz Kidz Schoolhouse for more fascinating safe class SCPs.